Good evening, everyone. My name is Sister Mary Praniski. I'm the interim director at the Aquinas Center, and I'd like to take this occasion to welcome you to this joint presentation, Aquinas Center and the Notre Dame Club of Atlanta. We're very excited to be able to work with the Notre Dame Club. It's the beginning of a wonderful relationship. I wanted to also welcome you on behalf of the Catholic Studies program of Candler School of Theology. Okay, the beginning clapper there is the director of the Catholic Studies program of Candler School of Theology. It's a new program this year, and we're very excited to collaborate with them as well. This is the beginning of our celebration of the canonization of Oscar Romero, who was canonized yesterday. And so if you haven't yet gotten a holy card that Tony back there has, he would like to make sure you have one of those. It's a gift from the Catholic Studies program and the Aquinas Center in celebration of the canonization of Oscar Romero. I'd also like to invite you to some coffee and cookies in the back. The cookies came from the El Salvador Bakery. This week we're celebrating the saint of El Salvador, and so tomorrow, if anybody would like to join us, we are writing letters of support for those who are in detention at the Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia, and that's at lunchtime, and we're going to serve pupusas from the El Salvador Bakery, which we will bring tomorrow as well. Tomorrow evening, we would like to invite you to watch the movie Romero. There are many people who may not have heard about Oscar Romero, and so tomorrow evening in this room, 102, downstairs as you come in, we're going to show the movie Romero tomorrow night. And then on Thursday, we'd like to invite you to a luncheon gathering where we're going to talk about the book Radius of Us, the author of which is here in the front row, Marie Marquardt. We actually will be giving away anybody who would like a book. We bought books for everyone, and Marie can sign them while you're there on Thursday. So you're welcome for lunch. Bring your own on Thursday. And we'll have a discussion about Radius of Us and have a book signing. So you're welcome to that. That's in Cannon Chapel. And then on Friday, we are having another gathering over at Raoul Hall to make the connection between the violence of El Salvador when Oscar Romero was assassinated and what's happening today, because it's all of a piece. And so on Friday, we'll have that discussion at Raoul Hall. So that's our week-long celebration of the canonization of Oscar Romero. You are welcome to come to any of it. If you would like to register, go to the Aquinas Center website. If not, just show up. We'll have plenty of food for everybody. So with that, I would like to introduce Ryan Gorey, who is with the Notre Dame Club, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. Ryan.
Thank you, Sister. Hi, different size mics for different people. Thank you for coming. I could talk. I was not an engineer at Notre Dame. I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. It's from the University of Notre Dame. This Professor Timothy Matovina is the professor and chair of theology at the university. He works in the area of theology and culture with a specialization in U.S. Catholic and U.S. Latino theology and religion. He has published numerous popular and scholarly articles and authored or co-authored 18 books. In fall 2018, Oxford University Press will release his most recent book, Theologies of Guadalupe, From the Era of Conquest to Pope Francis. In addition to his scholarly work, Professor Matovina enjoys offering presentations and workshops in pastoral institutes, dioceses, and parishes throughout the United States. Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe start with a moment of prayer, please. Saint Oscar Romero, pray for us. Saint Paul VI, pray for us. Holy martyrs known and unknown of Central America and all over the earth, pray for us. Well, friends, thanks very much for being here this evening. Notre Dame has these lectures all over the country, so we have the chance to go visit with our alums, our students, and tonight also with other folks at Emory. So it's great when they combine. It's wonderful to see. Actually, I see people I've known from very different places tonight, and it's been great to have this kind of reunion with so many folks. So the time's going to be short. We won't go too long. I'll leave some time for questions. And this is just going to be introductory. We won't be able to cover nearly everything that should be covered to talk about Latino Catholics. But let's start out with a little history. Because very often people start to think of Latino Catholics, we think recent immigrants, and it's certainly the case. Many Latinos are recent immigrants, just coming, nourishing our country with their energy, their faith, their dedication. But actually the first Christians that ever lived in what's now the United States were also Latino Catholics. Maybe you know this already, the first permanent settlement of Europeans, I'm not talking about the native peoples now, but of Europeans, the first permanent settlement in the United States was where? St. Augustine, Florida, 50 years before Jamestown, the first British settlement. And if you go back to Puerto Rico, which is Commonwealth of the United States, the first diocese was a century before Jamestown. So Latino Catholics have been here a long time. It's not the case that we only have new immigrants. It's a long-standing Catholic population. When Pope Francis came in 15, he canonized Junipero Serra, who was evangelizing in California before the United States existed. So just to he said that in his homily. He reminded us that Catholic evangelizers had been here before the United States was even founded. And indeed, Latino Catholics have been in territories now part of the United States for twice as long as our country has existed. So just a few points to bring home that initial insight or initial idea. Latino Catholics have been here a long time. All right. So, night talks, you should give a little bit of humor, so this is supposed to be funny, what I'm about to tell you now. Now, this yeah, laugh now, laugh, sign. So a few years ago, this was brought home in a sort of a mock court case. This wasn't real, it was a publicity stunt on both sides. But the first Catholics that arrived in what's now the Southwest got to El Paso, Texas, April the 3rd, 1598. They'd crossed the Chihuahua Desert with the party of Juan de Oñate. They were going to look for the 7 cities of gold. They got to El Paso and they met the Tigua native peoples, and they had a Catholic mass and a celebration. They had a big fiesta. So this was more than 20 years before the Pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving. So for years, the people of El Paso said, no, actually the first Thanksgiving was not in Plymouth Rock. The first Thanksgiving was in El Paso, and we did everything that they supposedly did. So this publicity stunt was several years ago. The people from El Paso, and now their Thanksgiving is April the 3rd, the day of that first Mass said in the Southwest. They sent a delegation over U.S. Thanksgiving, November, up to where Plymouth Rock is, and they had a mock court case. Again, this was a publicity stunt, it wasn't real. The judge was a descendant, many, many generations hence, of the original Pilgrims. So it didn't look too good for the El Pasoans because the judge was, from the other side, But they brought their evidence, and the judge finally ruled in their favor. And he sentenced the Pilgrims to go to El Paso the following April the 3rd and to publicly read a confession that they'd been stealing the real Thanksgiving for all of these years. So both sides got some free publicity out of it, but it brought home the point I'm trying to make. The first Christians in what was now the United States were Latinos. Now, when we think of Catholic history, of course, we think of the 13 colonies. We tend to think of the United States being founded in those colonies and then moving westward. That's in fact what happened. But of course, there weren't many Catholics in those 13 colonies. At the signing of the Declaration of Independence for the United States, less than 1% of the population was Catholic. Indeed, Catholicism was outlawed or barred in various ways in all 13 colonies, including the one colony founded by Catholics, which was Maryland. Very good, of course, named after the Virgin Mary. That one's easy, you got that one now. Even in Maryland, eventually Catholics were not allowed to vote, hold public office, or have public worship. They had to worship in private chapels on the plantations and so on. It was Jesuit priests, of course, in those early decades. So the United States was not a Catholic country in its foundation at all. But by 1850, 75 years after the Declaration of Independence, the Catholic Church was the largest single religious group in the United States. It has been ever since. Now, there were more Protestants than Catholics, But if you took the groups of Protestants individually, Methodist, Baptist, Anglican, the Catholic would have been larger than any of those. And it's been ever since. And why was that? Well, because of massive immigration. The potato famine, revolutions in Germany, later revolutions in Italy, Poland, that great century of immigration, all those immigrants came. And that's how we usually tend to think of the history of the Catholic Church in the United States. It grew because all these European immigrants came. And indeed, that's my own origins. I'm part Irish. On my father's side, I'm Croatian. The last name is Croatian. But the story of Latinos who had already been here is quite different, because the first large group of Latinos who came into the United States did not immigrate. They did not cross a border. The border crossed them. So the Southwest, when the United States had a war with Mexico, Mexico ended up losing half of its land, and those people didn't move, but they kind of forcibly became residents of the United States, from Texas all the way across to California. When I first met I'm married to a woman from South Texas, Mexican-American. When you get invited to a Mexican family's house, it's not like getting invited to the houses of the girls I took to the prom in high school. It's very, very serious. So if you're gonna get invited to the house. And I knew that I was about to meet either my future in-laws or my ex-girlfriend's parents. So you gotta get ready for that. Remember my father-in-law taking me for a walk through the barrio and telling me his little consejos, his advice. And he said this, I'll never forget. He said, "You see this land around here, Tim?" He says, "You see this land? This used to be Mexico." He said, "We know that you gringos came in here and you stole all this land from us." He says, "But don't worry, we're not a vengeful people." He's saying all this in Spanish, of course. He's a working man. He says, "We're not vengeful people, but we're taking all this land back house by house." He says, "Let me tell you something. You marry one of the daughters of this wife of mine, you're going to be reconquistado." Because that's the way the women are. But that was kind of his attitude, They still sort of felt, this is kind of still ours. The border between the United States and Mexico, of course, was originally the border between Louisiana and Texas. Texas was part of Mexico. The Louisiana Purchase, Thomas Jefferson, that's before Mexico was independent. So the Louisiana-Texas border was the border between the United States and Spain, New Spain. Then Mexico got its independence a few decades after that, and the border was now between Texas and Louisiana, Mexico, USA. So the first town you'd hit was Nacogdoches. And there was a priest there, Father de Leon. He'd been there been in Texas for 40 years. He'd been there a number of years in Nacogdoches. And he was found dead one day outside of town with a bullet wound in his head. The day before, he had been in town seen arguing with this settler from the United States. The rule was they could come to Mexico and get free land, but they had to agree to be Mexican citizens and accept Catholic baptism. Those were the rules of Mexico. And this man apparently did not, like a lot of the settlers, he did not want to actually get baptized. He just wanted a priest to sign a piece of paper saying he was baptized, because he already had his own religion. And the priest wouldn't do it. Father de Leon said, no, unless you're actually going to get baptized, I'm not going to sign a paper and lie about it. So the next day, the priest was going out of town on a communion call on his horse, and he was found dead just a short distance out of town from a bullet wound to the head, close range. The Mexican community accused this man who had been arguing with him of having killed him, and he was brought to trial. But he was acquitted by an all-white jury and a white judge on the defense that the priest had committed suicide, which the Mexican community saw as a travesty. He said, how could this be? This man's been here for 40 years. Harsh winters. It does actually get cold in Texas sometimes. Native American attacks, sometimes lack of food. These were isolated settlements way out in the frontier. He was the last Franciscan in Texas from the mission period. And this guy had stayed in his post. After a lot of them went back to Spain after Mexico got independent, he stayed. He was with the people. So they said, how could this man have done such a desperate act when he was taking Holy Communion in his pocket? He never would have let the Blessed Sacrament waver out there in the wilderness without being tended. but there was nothing they could do about it. And then 2 years later, mysteriously, the Catholic parish church was burned to the ground, and they didn't even bother to take anyone to trial for that. And then there were leaders, the former mayor, because by now the incoming group had taken over the politics, but the former mayor, some of the landowners, the business people among the Mexican community, they were systematically run out of town and told to go back to Mexico, which was somewhat ironic because Nacogdoches was actually still in Mexico. But there was this kind of complete takeover. So that was the experience not of immigration, but of kind of being conquered. But it's actually a beautiful story. The way this story kind of ends, years later, 15 years after that priest was shot, was the next time a priest arrived at that town of Nacogdoches. They were French priests who were coming in. Now, Texas at that point had become part of the United States, so it was a lot safer. There were less threat of native attack, and certainly Mexican, Texan hostilities had ended in terms of war. So these French priests were coming in trying to revive the faith. A lot of times those French priests saw the Mexicans and thought they were kind of superstitious, or they didn't quite know the faith very well. But these priests wrote a glowing report back to their headquarters in Paris. I have a copy of it in my office. Beautiful letter, where they say, you're not going to believe what we found in this place called Nacogdoches, Texas. These people had their priests murdered, their church burned down, their lay leaders run off, and for 15 years, from what we are told, they have never stopped worshiping every Sunday in this. They go to these people's houses, they pray the rosary, they catechize their children, they bury their dead, they baptize their children, which you can do in the Catholic Church, in state of emergency, you can baptize. And as soon as we showed up and they found out we were priests, and we showed them the papers to prove to them that we're actually Roman Catholic priests and not something else, the whole town lined up for confession and communion. We've never seen anything like this, the faith of these people. Everything has been taken from them. Their land, their families in some cases, their position, the city council, their priest, their church, but not the Catholic faith. That's been their strength through all these times of trial. There's 1,000 beautiful stories like that of people who were not immigrants, but were in the Southwest and had my favorite word in Spanish, had the aguante. They had the unyielding perseverance to say, we will hold on to who we are, our dignity, and our Catholic faith, which helps us to have that dignity. So at the same time all these European immigrants were coming, Latinos had the opposite experience. They didn't cross the border crossed them. And they remained Catholic while they stayed in the lands where they transferred allegiances to another country. I've had a chance to study the cathedral in San Antonio, Texas, the oldest cathedral in the country, Catholic Cathedral, San Fernando. One of my favorite places where my wife and I got married there, that's part of it, but it's also a beautiful old cathedral. And one of my jobs there was to interview, when we were writing this book, I wrote it with the rector of the seminary, I had to interview some of the elderly people in the parish and other people to talk about why is this parish such an alive parish. It's been a Spanish-speaking church for almost 300 years, oldest cathedral in the country. So one of the ladies I had to visit was Doña Felipa. Doña Felipa, they kept telling me, oh, you need to talk to her. She's been here desde un principio. She's been here since the start of this church. So I went and saw her, and I said, Doña Felipa, you've been here desde un principio? She says, oh, yeah, Timoteo, I've been here from the very beginning of this church. Do you remember Father so-and-so? Father so-and-so. And she started mentioning priests whose names I knew because I read them in the archives. These guys had been dead for 40 years. She said, I was in the choir with that priest when I was little. I knew him. He came to our house when I had my first communion. So I said to her, Doña Felipa, you've been here desde un principio, from the very beginning. Do you know this church is almost 300 years old? Have you been here all that time? She said, well, I might have missed a year or two. The beautiful thing that they were saying, of course, wasn't true that she'd been there 300 years, but what they were saying was, this church has always been ours. Things come and go here, but this house of worship, this is where we are. This is where we have our sense of faith, community, and it's open to everybody, but it's our place. Felipa told me, she said, we got people here that been here under 6 countries and baptized their children at that same baptismal font that's right there. We were here when it was Spain, and then the Mexicans said we're independent now. They put their flag up. Then it was Mexico. Then it was the Republic of Texas. Then it was the United States of America. Then it was the Confederate States. Now it's the United States again. We don't know what country's coming through here next, but we're still going to be here. You know, that deep pride of their way that they kept their faith. And of course, in the contemporary era, it is a time of great Latino immigration, not just from Mexico, from all 22 countries where Spanish is spoken. The United States is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, of course, but from all 22 countries, they all have come here. So great diversification. We often think of the history of the Catholic Church at this point. We're now a kind of an Americanized church, if you will. You know, the descendants, like my family. In my family, you know, my grandfather was a worker, my dad was a foreman, and my brothers and I and my sister were the first ones to go to college. You know, you kind of just see what being in America has done for the family. You think of the trajectory. And so most of us now are, you know, I don't speak Croatian anymore. People, Italian, German, they don't have those languages. We become more American. And so even the press, even the Catholic press, tends to talk about Catholics in the United States as if we've now become, you know, part of this country in America. And it's true to a great extent. But at the same moment that's happening, we have waves of new immigrants coming from Asia, from Africa. There's more African priests in the United States than African-American priests today. And there's more African women religious than African-American women religious. Maybe that's part of an indictment of how many African-American vocations we've had within this country. But the immigration's coming from many places, but particularly from Latin America. For the first time a few years ago, the Catholic Church in the United States, we are now no longer a majority Caucasian institution. If you take, the Latinos are not half yet, but if you take the Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, African Americans, and add those together, they make now about 55% of the Catholic population. So we truly are an international group. And Latinos today, that are the new arrivals at least, because some have been here, you know, some have been here like Doña Felipa, 11 generations, 12 generations. They're not new. My wife's family's been in the United States longer than my family. You know, so the idea that Latinos, that bugs the heck out of her. When she gets pulled aside in the airport because of her brown skin to get checked, she says, there goes the white guy, he's going. And really, this has happened a dozen times. But she's been here in the United States longer than my family has. But, you know, she doesn't look like it, according to the standards sometimes of the way things are judged. So we're in the age of, yes, a church that's becoming more Americanized, but there's new immigrants in this Americanized church. And in fact, most of the leadership positions in the Catholic Church in the United States, bishops, priests, professors, right down the line, still the Euro-Americans, we predominate. But Latinos are the largest single group within in the church, and they are trying to make their way not in the immigrant church of my ancestors, but in the middle-class church that really the United States church has become now. All right, just a couple other quick points. There's so many beautiful people in the history. I mean, I could tell this history by telling the stories, and I got 4 or 5 names down here, but I'm just going to tell you one in the interest of time. One of my favorite persons in the history of Latino Catholics in the United States. Her name is Encarnación Padilla de Armas. This is a great woman. I only got to meet her once, and only just to shake her hand. She was already elderly when I was younger. But Encarnación Padilla de Armas was from Puerto Rico. She arrived in the United States right after the Second World War, 1945. She had $100 in her pocket, single mom, widow, and she arrives in New York not knowing what she's going to do. So she had some education. She got some jobs, started raising her son, trying to get him educated. And as she wandered around Manhattan, she noticed that there just weren't any Spanish-speaking Catholic priests, or very, very few, and no Puerto Rican priests whatsoever. And meanwhile, there were all these other churches, evangelical, Pentecostal churches that were kind of sprouting up. And they were reaching out to the Puerto Rican Catholics, but the Catholic Church wasn't doing much. And when the Puerto Ricans went to the Catholic Church, usually they were given a mass in the basement, you know. So that wasn't very welcoming. So she said, well, somebody's got to do something about this. Now, here's a lay woman, single mom, somewhat educated, but a young person. So she decided, well, I got to do something about this. So she figured out the name of this Jesuit priest named Father Joseph Fitzpatrick, one of the greatest sociologists of the Puerto Rican migration in history, really. And he taught at Fordham University. So they said to her, there's a priest, he's Irish, but he speaks Spanish, and he knows a lot about the Puerto Ricans. So she got her gumption up, and she went right over to this place called Fordham University and wandered around till she found his office and knocked on his door and went in and introduced herself. And he was a gracious man. I knew Father Fitzpatrick very well. He's just a holy prince of a human being. And he received her well, but here was this woman, kind of working day jobs and so on, and he was very welcoming, but he didn't know what was going to happen. She said, well, Father, we need to do something. He says, well, I'll tell you what. You go, you're telling me all about these churches you've seen and these places. You go write me a report and bring me that report. And you can bring me a good report. I'm a personal friend of Cardinal Spellman, one of the most famous cardinals in the history of the Catholic. He said, you bring me the report, I'll get you an appointment with Cardinal Spellman. So he sent her off, perhaps thinking, well, that's probably going to be the end of this. 6 weeks later, she comes back. She got a group of her friends together that she'd made in her parish. Manhattan's a big place with a lot of churches and a lot of nooks and crannies. 70-page, single-spaced type report. I have a copy of that in my office, too. They had gone to every single church, and they got down every single mass time, every single thing going on, and she goes in and she said, Father, you asked for the report. Here's the report. And he looked it over, and he was just amazed. He was absolutely amazed that she's done this. He says, now, when are we going to see the cardinal? And sure enough, now this woman has not been in New York but a few years, and now she's going to see Cardinal Spellman. I mean, the priest couldn't even go see Cardinal Spellman, And here's this migrant woman going in there. And she went in and very respectfully, but very passionately said, Cardinal, we got to do something. And the next year, Cardinal Spellman started the first Hispanic office, Catholic Action office, in any of the dioceses in the United States. And a few years after that, guess who was running the office? Encarnacion Padilla de Armas. And a few years after that, did any of you go to the Encuentro that just happened in Dallas? Rocio, did people? In the past. But they just had a big national Encuentro. I was there, and there was a big delegation from the Atlanta Archdiocese, dioceses around the country. That was the 5th Encuentro. The first one was in 1972, the first ever national meeting of Hispanic Catholics. Now, here's the easiest question I'm going to ask all night. Who do you think was the national coordinator of that first Encuentro? Encarnacion Padilla de Armas. I mean, this woman was amazing. And what she did, one migrant woman who just decided, I'm going to do something. Again, I could tell you many stories like that. They're beautiful. Latinos, we often think of Latinos and their needs, and certainly there are needs. Our immigrant sisters and brothers now have tremendous needs. But they've also contributed a tremendous amount. And their contributions should also be remembered. And again, I can't go into a lot of length on this, but let me give one example. Have any of you ever made a Cursillo retreat? Cursillo? De colores, de colores, de colores. Okay, Cursillo was started after the Second World War in Spain by Eduardo Bonin and his companions. Eduardo Bonin is now servant of God, nominated for sainthood. It was a retreat for men at first, because men don't often go to church. Apparently, it goes all the way back to Christ. There was 5,000, not counting women and children. I always think, well, there must have been 30,000 people there, If you got 5,000 men to show up, God knows how many women and children there would have been. But he was concerned that men, they'd drop their kids off at church and then stay outside and smoke till the man, they wanted the men to be more involved. So they started this retreat. It was very kind of evangelical. It would fit well with Methodism in the sense that, you got to get this personal relationship with Christ. And it was very effective. It was men giving witness to other men about the faith and, kind of really igniting them. I first met Cursillo, if I may tell his personal story. One year, I come from a, pretty large Catholic family, and it was Christmas, and we were exchanging little gifts and all that, and we turned to my father, my brothers and I, my sister was not born yet. We said, Dad, where's your gift for Mom? And I swear to this day, God rest his soul, he's gone now. He never would confess this to me, but I swear he just forgot to buy her a gift, But he said, oh, no, I got Mom a very special gift. I'm going to give it to her later. And we said, oh, God. Do you think he's going to find a store open now? Because back those days, stores didn't open on Christmas. Well, my mother had wanted to go to Cursillo, but the rule back then was the woman couldn't go till the man did, because the woman would get all on fire with faith, and the man would kind of, oh, God, that looks too emotional or something. So my mother's friends had all gone from our parish, and the priest was real involved, but my dad hadn't gone, so my mother hadn't gone. So comes dinner, and he's drinking his glass of wine and having his good old time, and we said, Dad, Mom's gift? He said, oh, yeah, well, now the whole family's here, Grandma's here, everybody's here. My gift to your mother is not a material gift, it's a spiritual gift. I'm going to make the cursillo. And that was the best gift my mother ever got. She started crying and hugged him and everything. And my brothers and I were going, oh, God, this guy's a lion. I was only 8 years old, but I'm going, what's this, you know? Well, he went to his cursillo, and I remember when he came back, he said, boys, y'all get in the living room, you sit there, I need to talk to you. And he came in, I can't remember his exact words, but it was something like, I'm the man of this house, and I've always, and I want you to obey it. He says, but we have a new leader in this house. It's not me. Jesus Christ is now. And he started preaching to us. My dad is a carpenter, hard-working man. He didn't talk that way. And we heard him talking that way. We said, man, what is this cursillo thing? This thing changes people. And then my mother went, of course, and later several of my brothers and I went when we got older, when we were old enough to do it. Well, cursillo first came to the United States because it was in Spain. First came to the United States in 1957, Waco, Texas. There was a priest there who was from Spain who knew about the cursillo, and there were 2 soldiers over there doing some kind of training at the base there, U.S. base, and they had made cursillo, and they said to the Spanish priest, we should start cursillo over here. It was so powerful in Spain, we should do one here. And so they got a few others to come from Spain, so they had enough of a team. You need a team to do this. And they did the first cursillo in the United States in Spanish in 1957 among the Mexican Americans. And within 5 years, it had spread to over 100 dioceses and had been translated into English. And eventually, far more people went to cursillo in English, like my family, myself included. I hadn't learned Spanish yet. Then went in Spanish. But it eventually hit almost every diocese in the United States. And then there were spin-offs of cursillo. Maybe some of the young people have heard of Teens Encounter Christ. That started in Michigan, not far from where Sister's from, where the young people said, our parents have all made cursillo, what's for us? So the priest there started Teens Encounter Christ. It was based on cursillo, but for young people. Search Retreat. Even Protestants came on cursillo and started Protestant versions of cursillo. The Episcopalians did, the Baptists did, the Methodists did. Eventually, Spanish-speaking groups founded it as well, so that in the end, cursillo became the most widespread and influential spiritual retreat renewal movement in the history of the United States of any religion, just in terms of the sheer number of people who have made the cursillo itself and all of its spin-offs, Catholic and Protestant. That is a gift that was given to Christianity in the United States by Latino Catholics. It came through Latino Catholics. So many, many other things we could talk about in terms of the gifts. All right, I hope that this is just a baseline, and that's just, if you remember nothing else from that first part of the talk, just to give a sense of how long Latinos have been here, how much they've struggled, how beautiful their faith has been, and how they have not just received, but contributed to religion and to the life of this nation. Let's talk a little bit. I'm just going to hit a couple of issues now, and again, if we had more time, we'd do a lot more. But just to hit a couple of issues of we're facing as a church now, as we try to, become a much more truly united body of Christ. One big challenge is integration. 100 years ago, and this is not true of Atlanta, but it's more true of the Midwest and especially the Northeast, where those European immigrants first arrived. 100 years ago, 2/3 of the Catholic parishes in the United States were ethnic or national parishes. That is, parishes that were German, Irish, Italian, Polish, and so on. You can tell the history of many towns in the Midwest and the Northeast if you know your saints and if you can measure the height of a steeple. Now, how is that? If you go up to a church and it's called St. Boniface, that's a German church, right? Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Italian church. St. Bavo is Belgian. St. Patrick? All right, I knew you'd get that one, all right. And so by the names of the saints, you can tell which group was there. Sometimes, like even in South Bend, those of you, Notre Dame alums, if you go through downtown South Bend, these churches are a block or two away from one another. I mean, you kind of think, why'd they do that? Well, one was the Italian church, one was the German church, Our Lady of Hungary was the Hungarian church, and so on, and they're right together. And all those men worked they walked to work when they were just kind of construction kind of jobs, and so their churches were all there. You can tell what order they were built in by the steeples. Because what would happen invariably, there are some exceptions to this, but often it's the Irish who got there first, and they'd have their church. And then the Germans might come. Well, there's no church yet, they just arrived. No German priest. All they can do is go to the Irish church, and they're told, well, okay, you can pray down in the basement. Well, of course, the Germans don't like that. And these are immigrant people. These are working people. These are not rich people. But they gather pennies, nickels, and dimes. Finally, they get their own priest, and they get the bishop to give them some land. And 1 block away, they build a German church. Usually, and often, I should say, they build with their own hands, the sweat of their own brow. And they build that church, and they build it up. And if the Irish got 1 tower, they put 2, and they make sure their towers are 4 feet taller than the Irish towers. So they can get up there on top and say, we used to be in the basement, but look where we are now. And then the Italians come, and there's our 4 feet taller. It doesn't always work out, but there are cities where you can literally, there's no exceptions to the rule. The name of the saint and the height of the steeple tells you the whole story. Well, those churches were churches where those immigrants felt at home. Those churches were, and the parish schools that the sisters ran with them, and I'm not just saying this because Sister Mary's here, and I've already grown to love her in the short time I've known her. The entire Catholic Church in this country is built on the shoulders of nuns. The nuns built the largest private school system, the largest private hospital system, and the largest private social system, not just in the history of this country, in the history of the world, in any country, all done by women religious in this country. And those nuns and those priests and those people in those churches, they allowed those immigrants to integrate into U.S. society from a position of strength. They were poor workers in the factories and treated hard. Now, the Irish experienced the same kind of prejudice that Mexicans experienced, and the Italians probably even worse, because they were the darkest-skinned Europeans among the Catholics. But the parishes were their power places. Out there, we're nobody. We're just construction workers. They don't even ventilate the places. People die, and nobody worries about it. Here, we're something else. We're a parish community. We're the family of God. The sisters love us. The sisters are the one that taught. The first bilingual schools in the United States were Catholic parochial schools. German nuns teaching in German, and then slowly helping the children to learn English in their own style and in their own way. They weren't forced into it or punished for speaking German. The people they looked up to the most, the sisters, taught them the language. So those parishes were tremendous places that integrated the immigrants into the Catholic Church. It's amazing how many of them kept the faith and into society. Nowadays, 100 years later, for various reasons, the size of the Catholic Church, the number of language groups, the fewer number of priests, and various other reasons, bishops, and I'm not criticizing any bishops for this, we don't have these national parishes anymore. Often in a lot of these towns, they've already got 6 or 8 churches in town, and they got to close a couple of them because the roof's caving in and it costs $1 million to fix it. It's cheaper to build another church somewhere else. So the bishops have a different situation than in this era when we were building all these churches. So consequently, what happens is a lot of the Latinos coming in, they are asked to be part of churches that are already there and already been built and are already kind of run by English-speaking people. That would be more the case of Atlanta. These are called shared parishes. Sue has written about this beautifully in her dissertation. She teaches here at Candler, so maybe she'll give a talk to you another night on that. But these shared parishes are parishes with 2 or more language groups that worship under the same roof. 1/3 and growing, more than 1/3 now and growing, of the parishes in the United States are these shared parishes. So there's been a huge shift in parish life in the United States, for all of us, not just for the immigrants, even for the people that were already here. We used to have national parishes. Now, more and more, we have these shared parishes where we're under the same roof. Often, this can cause quite a bit of tension because the new group doesn't really feel they're being allowed to be totally at home in that new church. It's like they're in someone else's church, Sometimes this comes across in subtle ways that maybe people don't notice. I worked in one of these parishes years ago in Texas. It was part Italian. They're the ones that had built the church. And then it was Mexican-American immigrants and others that had been there a little while. And, you notice things like the Spanish Mass was always kind of at the end of the day, the priest that was the pastor, he spoke a little Spanish, but there was another priest, but the priest that spoke Spanish wasn't the pastor, so the English-speaking priest was. So there's little things you notice that kind of said, this group is kind of really, and then the church, most of the saints inside in the walls of the church were Italian saints. The Mexican people hadn't quite worked their saints in there so that they sort of felt it was theirs. But here's the thing, here's one of the little things that the Mexican ladies talked to me, and I was young back then. I still am kind of young, but I was younger back then. And the Italian ladies kind of loved me because they thought my last name was Italian. I never told them it wasn't, but because they thought Matovina. And I spoke a little Italian. And I spoke Spanish, so the Mexican ladies all loved me too. Oh, I was like the grandchild of all these old elderly women. What the Mexican ladies didn't like, the Italian ladies all had keys to the parish kitchen. And the Mexican ladies didn't have any key. And when they wanted to go in there and cook tamales or something, they had to go to the parish office, to the secretary who didn't speak Spanish, and ask for the key. And they just resented that. She made them feel like children. You know, I told the pastor that several times, but she'd been there longer than God, and there was no changing the way she was. I mean, she was born to be the parish secretary, and you know the lady I'm talking about. You know, and the Mexican ladies would show up just before quitting time at 5 o'clock. You knew they were there for the key, and she would say to them, "What is it that you want?" And I was in the back of my office sometimes. I'd come running out to try to run interference and say, "They want the key. Isn't it obvious they want the key?" And then she'd give them the key and say, "Don't lose it, and make sure you clean up the kitchen." They were always accusing the Guadalupanas of not cleaning up. And I'm sorry, those Mexican ladies, I'm married to one now. They are clean. Trust me, they are clean. You should see what I have to do at my house to clean that house. But there was always these complaints, and that's what bothered them most. One day, the pastor asked me to lock up all the rooms at the end of the night, all the activities and everything. He had something to do. So I was going around checking everything, and I looked in that kitchen, and I saw those Italian and those Mexican ladies were both in there. And I said, "Oh my God, this is going to be World War III. Somebody double booked the kitchen. God knows what's going on in there right now. I should just go home and pretend I didn't see that and tell the pastor everything was locked. Duty, I got to go in there." So I walked in there, and it was a miracle. It was truly a miracle. They were all happy. They were all smiling. And one of my Italian grandmother ladies came up and she said, "Oh, Tim, this is so much fun. We're teaching these Mexican ladies how to make tamales." I said, "You're doing what?" And the Mexican lady turned to me and she said, "Oh, yes, this is wonderful." And the Italian ladies had brought in their pasta machines. You know those machines you used to roll out the pasta? And they were showing the Mexican ladies how to roll out the masa for the tamales with these pasta machines. And the Mexican ladies are going, "Man, we're super tamaleras now. Shoo, shoo, shoo. We're doing 15 dozen tamales in 4 minutes. Shoo, shoo, shoo." And I said, "Lord, what the Holy Eucharist seemingly has not accomplished, the pasta machine has done. I thank you, Creator of heaven and earth." This is the ongoing challenge, though. The parishes, how are we going to help people not to just feel welcomed, but feel at home? And in many ways, that's the challenge of the Catholic Church right now. You know, the church is not holy because all are welcome. The church is holy because everyone's at home. Even when you say to someone, "Welcome to our parish," think about that. You're the guest, we're the owners of the house. It's very subtle. But what comes across is, you know, this is ours. And we'll decide how much of it and under what circumstances you can use it. And it's hard for people, particularly if it was a parish that's got those old Polish ladies, and now they're only 30%, then 20, then 10%. And they feel like they've been kind of overwhelmed by all these newcomers, and all their children and grandchildren have moved out to the suburbs, and they're stuck, and it's hard to kind of let go. And, so it's hard on both sides. I'm not just trying to take one side of this. It's hard on both sides. But in fact, the church is the church when we move from hospitality to homecoming. And I think that's the biggest challenge of the Catholic Church today. How do we make all of us, including those that have already been here a long time or that built the church, feel this is our home? So God, I had so many other points to raise. I want to leave some time for Q&A. I want to end with one good story. One of my proudest moments of being a Catholic. When I was doing that study at San Fernando and finding the woman that I married, those were great years. I was invited to do these interviews, as I said, so the priest, Father Virgil, said to me, "You should interview the mayor of San Antonio." Now, San Antonio is an old Catholic town, so of course, in a Catholic town, the church is right on the main plaza, and the government building's across the plaza. So the mayor's office was right across from the cathedral, and he was Baptist. He was a Baptist faith, but he'd be at the noon mass. The noon mass had 200-300 people all the time. It was a very popular downtown mass. And you'd see the mayor there 2-3 times a week. You know, he'd come to the Mass. He liked the Mass. So the priest said to me, ask the mayor, tell him I said so, he'll give you an interview. His name was Bill Thornton. So I got the interview with Mayor Thornton. I made the appointment, went and saw him in his office. And as I said to him, Mayor, tell me why, you're a Baptist. What attracts you to go to that Catholic church? What brings you in here? He said, oh, man, I love that church. That old church, those old stones. I think of all the people that have prayed here, and we're praying with them and remembering them. I just love that. He says, even all the marks from all those candles on the wall, he says, I hope they don't wipe those off too much, because he'd clean up every now and then. He says, those candle marks remind me that people have prayed here. Things have happened here. The history of our city has happened all around here. He said, I like that. He says, I'll tell you something else. I like the preaching. We Baptists, we pride ourselves on it, but these priests you got over here, they'll give Baptists a run for their money. Those are gospel preachers. They get down to the message. I take away a lot from what the priests preach here. We kept talking. I kept pressing. He says, I'll tell you another thing. He says, actually, I hadn't thought about this too much, but now that we're talking, I'm thinking about it. You know what I like about San Fernando? He says, old Mexican ladies that hand out the worship aids when you walk in. He says, everywhere I go, it's Mr. Mayor this and Mr. Mayor that. Even politicians that don't like me, Mr. Mayor me, or the head of the chamber, because they want to get something from me. So they're always, Mr. Mayor. He says, I walk in there, those ladies give me the biggest smile. They tell me they're so happy to see me. They have no earthly idea I'm the mayor. They're just happy. They are so happy. And they're that way for everybody. If tourists walk in, homeless people walk in. He says, and then when you walk into San Fernando and you sit, he says, I don't know who's going to sit next to me. President of the Frost Bank, head of the chamber, homeless person, tourist, one of the downtown prostitutes, a Buddhist. You just never know. That church is downtown and it's so open, everybody comes in. Everywhere else I go, there's only going to be certain people sitting next to me because I'm the mayor. In San Fernando, I get a chance to mix with all of San Antonio, the city that I'm mayor. He said, I could tell you something. I love my church, my Baptist church. I've been there my whole life. It was on the north side, one of the nicer areas of town. He said, but some of the people that walk in here for that daily mass that week, if they would walk into my church, they'd be greeted at the door all right with something like, oh, welcome, can we help you? In such a way that they would know, they're not supposed to be here. But not in San Fernando. Everybody comes in. He says, I sometimes have been thinking, I come back to my office, I go to the Mass and have my lunch, and I come back here, and he says, and I pray here in my prayer corner. He had a little corner with his Bible and everything and his cross. And he says, I never kind of really thought about why I did it, but this is the prayer I say. He was a very Christian man. He said, Lord, thank you for the honor, the blessing to be the mayor of this your town, San Antonio. And whatever comes through this door this afternoon, help me to do what you would have me do as mayor, what is really right for the people of this town, and to make it a better place for everyone. And whatever I do today, Lord, help me to make San Antonio a little bit more like San Fernando Cathedral. I've never heard a more beautiful thing said about a Catholic church. Because what he was kind of saying, I'm not using my words now. Here out in the world, there's divisions. There's status symbols. There's this and there's that. There's this person and there's this group and there's that group. But in that cathedral, that old Latino cathedral with the Mexican ladies waiting at the door, when you walk through the doors, you walked into a different world. You walked into the world as it's supposed to be, the world that God intended, where everybody is not just welcomed, everyone belongs as a member of the household. That's what we're trying to do in the struggles we have with these shared parishes. How do we make the church truly the home of everyone? In Spanish, you never say, welcome to our home. You always say, bienvenidos, estás en tu casa. Welcome, you are in your own house. This is your home. Come and be part of the home. This is your home. Sometimes when I talk to pastors, you ask them, well, Father, how's the unity and diversity going in your church? Oh, they go, I don't know. It's kind of weird the way pastors will respond. If you ask a pastor, how are you doing for evangelization in the parish? I say, well, evangelization is not really a Catholic thing. We're getting better, but we got work to do on that. How's your youth ministry? Well, the youth group is growing, but God, there's so many needs among the youth. There's so much more we got to do. How's your worship? Well, the choir. We have no trouble as Catholics talking about any aspect of our parish life or our life as Catholics saying, we're getting there, but we're not there yet. That's our usual answer to about everything, except if you talk about unity and diversity. Because somehow if you say, gee, we're getting stronger, but we still got a ways to go, it makes it sound like you just said, man, we're a bunch of racists over here. And people don't want to say that. They're uncomfortable with that question. They're uncomfortable thinking about it. What I often tell priests, or others that I'm talking to about this, we should think about this the same way we think about everything else in parish life. Are we ever going to be perfectly united as we should be? No. I love my wife more than anyone. Is the unity what it should be, or should it be more next year than it is this year? Yes, it should be. We should continue to grow in love. The parish should continue to grow in love. So on the one hand, we celebrate the Eucharist in the same place, which means we already are the body of Christ. And the calling is to become what we have received, to become what's been given to us in the Holy Eucharist itself. We are one body. And yet, we need to live out more the Holy Communion that we've received. I tell this every time I'm invited to speak to freshmen at Notre Dame. Here at Notre Dame, we're not yet what we should be. We're not as diverse as we should be. We're not as unified as we should be. And sometimes you're going to hear and see things that are outright wrong and sinful, that are divisive and even racist. Still happens here. The goal is not that somehow we're going to find some little solution and we're going to take care of this like it's a problem. The goal is that when you students leave here in 4 years, please leave this place better than you found it. Make it better than it was. That's the spirit of this place. It's the spirit of any Catholic institution, parish as well. How do we keep becoming who we already are in Christ? Year by year, week by week, commitment by commitment. I think that's the biggest call today. Latinos are on a journey in this church in this country, as we all are, and that's a journey, I think, from hospitality to homecoming, to really making the church their home, taking ownership of it, as the Irish and the Germans, the Italians, others did beforehand, and continue to make the church come alive in the country. Well, friends, the time goes by too quickly. We'll just take a few questions. The cookies are waiting for us, but I wouldn't take a question or two if you want to offer some thought or critique or anything. So let me give a few concrete strategies. One, I hinted at, newcomers want to see their own sacred, especially Latinos, their own sacred images somehow represented in the sacred iconography of the parish. So that can be tricky sometimes. Sometimes there's a bunch of extra side altars and you can bring a Guadalupe in, or you can bring in a Caridad del Cobre if you're Cuban, or whatever, different groups have different ones. But when people see their own sacred imagery, they start to say, oh yeah, we belong here. If it's not all just the original community's ethnic, group imagery. Same thing with religious festivals and celebrations. So for Mexicanos, of course, a Guadalupe festival says, this is ours, this is home. Sometimes you can share those beautifully with others. What we did in the parish in Texas, since the Mexicanos had a practice of the home altar on All Saints' Day, which is coming up, we would put an altar at the entranceway to the church. It was a big entranceway. And we invited all the parishioners to bring their favorite saint and put it on that altar. So the Italian ladies brought theirs, Mexican, and then other groups, African, we had smaller bags of Filipinos. They all brought their own. And it was a way that each one, and then we saw them. They were visiting after Masses, between Masses, saying, oh, this is ours. Now, back in the Philippines, this is what this one means and why it's important to us. And this is what we do on this one's feast day. So, that kind of imagery and religious traditions. One of the biggest ones is leadership parity. How do we get leaders from the different groups involved in public work areas of ministry? So, of course, if you can get a Latino priest, that really helps, or a sister, but at the very least, communion ministers, lectors, parish council, How do we work towards leadership parity and really involving people in decision-making processes? You know, that's always been, that's what worked for the previous immigrants. When they had their own priests, their own sisters, their own lay leaders, then they felt, okay, this is ours, because someone who understands our experience is helping to lead the community. So those would be just a few. So people have these symbolic and very concrete ways in which they actually are participating fully in the life, decision-making, and the worship of the parish. Great question, Rocio. Thank you. Yes.
We're in Atlanta, more relatively new in terms of Hispanic, with majority Hispanic Catholic population, but it's been relatively a lot of first-generation immigrants, especially over there about the Olympics. And so, that's the experience I've had here. How's that different from parts of the U.S. where there's leadership and so on, where you've had, Florida, it was Hispanic and Catholic forever, right? Texas, California. Can you tell a major difference in how we lead, how we go forward, as well as giving them as examples, but I think we're different.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I spent all my formative years in this work in Texas, and then I was in Washington, D.C. Now I've been in South Bend. And in some ways, what I see in places like Atlanta, where the population has grown only in recent decades, really since 1990, not that there weren't Latinos here before then, but the larger numbers have come. Atlanta's going through what Texas went through 60, 80 years ago. Now, mind you, some of those people have been in Texas a long time, but Texas got a lot of, and so did California and New Mexico, immigration after the Mexican Revolution of 1910. There were already many people there, but larger numbers came in. If you can believe this, around 1900, some political leader in Los Angeles predicted that Los Angeles would soon have no Mexicans, because the families that were left over from the time when California was conquered, were intermarrying and that, and it looked like Los Angeles was going to end up with no Mexicans. That was probably the worst prediction in the history of the state of California, because these large numbers came in. So I see exactly what you're saying. That's kind of, some of these processes are older in those places. You have second and third generation. You have, Latinos who have got a degree from Notre Dame and, are now have that capacity to lead. The challenges those communities, like in Texas, often face is when you get this leadership group that's educated, how do you keep them tethered to the Catholic Church and really moving forward in leadership? Because a lot of times they identify Latino Catholicism with a Spanish-speaking immigrant reality. And a lot of these people are very professional now, very successful. Their talents would be great service to the church, but the challenge is to try to connect them. A place like Atlanta, the parish you're describing, I think one of the challenges is don't move too quickly. There's a tendency a lot of times, get the people to speak English, and of course, it's good for the people to speak English. It's a tremendous advantage in this country to know English. 98% of the second generation of the children born here learn English. It's not like they're not going to learn English. Some of the immigrants don't, depending on how old they are when they get here and the level of education they had even in Spanish. So there can be a tendency sometimes to say, well, gee, for the sake of unity in this parish, we should push forward to speak the same language, i.e. English. And that's precisely what those national parishes for the German didn't do. It allowed the immigrants of our ancestors to come in over a period of 2 or even 3 generations from a position of strength. And it's going to take a little bit of patience for the rest of us. The other piece of that is people are more comfortable praying in the language that their mother and father and grandparents taught them to pray in. So sometimes people wonder, well, this person speaks English very well. He's a student at Emory University. Why are they more comfortable at Mass in Spanish? Because that's the way they learned to pray. I can tell you, once I learned to pray in Spanish, that was not my first language. But man, Spanish is a beautiful language to pray in. You really feel like you're pouring your heart and soul out to God. English can be so formal. Oh, you Lord and mighty, powerful. In Spanish, you'd never say that to God. You're pouring your heart and soul out. I feel very comfortable in my hours of greatest need praying in Spanish. So those are some of the ways we have to learn to kind of be patient with one another, because it's going to happen. The children of these immigrants are going to be English speaking, but the parents, it's very important to give them a way to keep their faith, and often that means the desire to pray in their own language. Same thing that happened with our ancestors of old, except we weren't in the same building. The Italians were over there and the Germans were over there, so it was a little bit easier. We weren't rubbing shoulders as often. Does that help at all with what you asked? Or?
No, I think those are being patient is important. We've seen also as a parent already where the desire is for unity, and therefore they sort of force children not only different languages, but different socioeconomic position, different levels of
Right.
education, and try to, so you end up sort of creating sort of an average that serves no sense, right? And so that's difficult. The question of if the children only learn their catechesis and prayers in English, they can't go to match with their parents.
They can't, and they can't pray. They can't pray at home with their parents either. Yeah, it's beautiful what you're saying. We got to make sure we go for unity and not uniformity. Uniformity is not unity. In a marriage, between two people who speak the same language, in a culture, we're going to perish. Uniformity means one group forced the other group to be what it wanted it to be, and then they called it unity. And that breeds resentment, and people vote with their feet, and they just don't go back to that church. Take maybe one more, because we got the cookies waiting for us, if there is one more. Please. The first and second generations? You're hitting it dead on. I didn't get to that point, but I think the biggest challenge for Latino Catholics and the biggest challenge for the entire Catholic Church in this country is handing on the faith to those young Latino, all of our children, but 60% of the children in Catholic children in this country now are Latinos. Immigration is a huge issue. Archbishop Gomez has said it's the civil rights issue of our day. I agree. But the biggest concern, I think, for the Catholic Church is how do we hand on the faith to these children who are in between cultures, in between worlds? Do you mind if I tell one more story before we go to the cookies? We have to cut it now, sister? Okay. Because your question reminded, I hope maybe this will help you to think more about it, because it sounds like you're really involved in this yourself. There was this novella on PBS a few years ago called American Family. You remember it? Edward James Olmos was the father. And it was like a story. This family had come from Mexico to California to Los Angeles during the time of the Mexican Revolution, and these episodes follow through. And you follow them from the young couple, she's pregnant as they cross into California, until the end of it, where she's now the grandmother, the matriarch. They've had all these children, and that's the end of this kind of novella, this what do you call it, soap opera. Kind of soap opera is not the right word, and novella is kind of like a story in Spanish. So one of the final episodes, my favorite, is called El Vestido, the dress. At Notre Dame, we have this in the library. I don't know if they have it here, but you can get all these episodes and watch them in English or in Spanish. So I'm going to Irish this up a little bit because this is my memory of it, but this is the gist of the story. The family's got these 10 kids or so, and they're a typical Mexican family. One has ended up in jail, another one ended up being a hardworking this, another one went to the military. They're kind of choosing all these different pathways. It's a very real family that's not romanticized in any way. All the problems and the warts of family life are brought out. One daughter, this is the 1940s, she gets a scholarship to Stanford University, one of the first ever Mexican Americans to go to Stanford University. Parents are very proud. She's in this bombed out East LA high school that's got a huge number of dropouts. She makes it to Stanford. So she's invited to give a speech before the entire student body. She comes home and tells her parents. Her mother's this little Mexican woman. And as soon as the mother hears that she's going to give a speech, she goes straight upstairs to this little closet she had. And in that little closet, she had her Sears sewing machine. Remember those old ones you have to do this on? You know? She starts sewing a dress for her daughter. Now, you're learning this story after, years later, after that mother became a grandmother and she died. One of the final episodes of the show. So they have the funeral mass and they all come back to the house. And when they come back to the house, this daughter who had gone to Stanford and become a lawyer, she goes up into that little tiny room, really it's no bigger than a closet, and she starts rubbing her hand over that Singer sewing machine. And she's reminiscing her mother's domestic labor, her mother's love. And she opens this chest of drawers and she pulls out this dress. And she holds it up and looks in the mirror. And it's kind of this chiffon-looking Scarlett O'Hara dress with all the ruffles at the bottom. You know, kind of an odd-looking thing, really. She holds that dress up into the mirror and she begins to cry. And then she has the flashback. And the flashback is that senior year in high school when she comes home and tells her mother that she's given the speech to the whole school. A week before she's to give the speech, she comes home from school and her mother says, "Cierra los ojos," you know, close your eyes, close your eyes. And she's got her eyes closed, and then when she opens the eyes, the mother's standing there with this big smile, you know, and she's holding the dress. This dress that would have been perfect back when the mother was a little girl back in the village in Mexico, when the women walked around the plaza one way and the men walked around the plaza the other way, and they kind of looked at each other. That's how you dated back then. So, "Oh, would you like to walk with me?" That's the dress she would have worn. She says, "Mi hija, I made this for you, for your speech." And she said, "Oh, mama, I've never seen anything like it." And you could tell right away that daughter is not going in front of the whole school wearing that dress. It would have been embarrassing. So there's one Chicana, one Mexican-American teacher in the whole school back in those days. And that teacher takes the girl out and buys her a pantsuit at Montgomery Ward's. Very chic. The first set of clothes she'd ever had that wasn't made by her mother. Montgomery Ward's. I mean, this is like a big deal. So she says, "Well, what am I going to do?" Well, on the day of the speech, I'll leave the house wearing the dress. I'll jump into the forest. There's kind of bushes there. I'll change into the pantsuit, come home, change again. Everybody's going to be happy. Little did she know her mother had another surprise for her. And she makes the husband come home early. I really identify with this husband, all right? Because the story is really about the mother and the daughter, but, you know, I'm married to the Mexican woman, too, so I kind of get into this, you know. He says, "You know, you got to come home." He was a barber. He says, "Well, I got all my clients, and you know, you got to come home, such and such." So, of course, he obeys. They go to the school. They get there late. They're immigrants. They're wandering around. They can't find anything. Everybody's already in the auditorium, and they go here and there and there, and finally, they're not in the auditorium yet, but they can hear through the auditorium, in the microphone, the daughter's voice. You know, she's projecting and speaking to the entire school. And the mother gets this beautiful smile. You know, "Mi hija," she's so proud. She hasn't seen her yet. So finally they find a door. It's the wrong door. They don't come in the back. They come right in, and they end up right on the stage. But they're behind the curtains, so only the daughter can see the parents. But the mother and daughter are literally like, you know, she's here, and the mother's maybe just right over here, you know. And she sees the dress. And the daughter looks and realizes from her mother's face what has happened. At the mother's just heartbroken that she chose not to wear her dress. Her voice falters, but she continues on, and the mother turns to the husband, the guy I feel for in this story, and says, "A la casa." He said, "Pero mi amor, we just got here. You told me to take you. We're going to the house." If you're a smart man, when that happens, you go to the house. She marches through the barrio. Doesn't greet anyone, just straight. March, march, march. Gets to the house. Closes all the curtains so no one can see her. Closes the door. Locks it. Deadbolts it. And collapses in her chair and begins to sob uncontrollably. Now this is when men really get useless. You know, he says to like, is it my fault? Is it something I did? I came home. I took you over there. I brought you back. Would you like some water? You know, he just doesn't quite know what to do with all these tears. Until finally she gets up and she beats him on the chest. Not because she's angry at him, but because she trusts him enough to express her anger. And she says, "You. What did I do?" What kind of a man brings a mother to a country where she can't make a dress for her own daughter? What kind of a man brings a mother to a country where she can't make a dress for her own daughter? Now, the reason that's called American family, because that's a Mexican family, but that's an American family. All of our families went through that. All of our ancestors. You sacrifice everything you know. The place you the Irish did not leave Ireland because they didn't like Ireland anymore. Nor did the Germans or Italians leave their place. Nobody wants to leave home. You leave home because you have to. You have no other choice. You sacrifice everything that's familiar, everything that you love. Why? I lay down my life, these kids are going to get something that I couldn't even dream of back home: education, opportunity, safety. But then you move to a country where it's not just a different culture. This is a completely different world. You don't even understand the world these kids live in, to the point where you can make your own daughter a dress. So to me, that episode speaks of exactly what you're talking about. It's always a challenge for parents to give faith to their children. How many parents here in this room, I bet every one of us, you pray your children will remain true to your faith. Biggest treasure you got to give them. This is our faith. Nothing else matters as much as this. But it's really hard if you're an immigrant parent and that child literally lives in a world that you just can't understand, or can't understand completely. So that's the challenge. What do we do about it? One thing I think is very important, we need people like you who are gente puente, bridge people, who know the two cultures and can tell the best ministers to youth or other youth, who can say, look, we've been brought to this country, or we've been born in this country, we're born in this country. Our gift is to take the best of the United States and the best of our parents' traditions and culture and bring them both together. What a beautiful advantage to be bicultural. Unfortunately, what happens is a lot of times young people take the worst of this culture and the worst of their own culture. My wife sees this every day teaching in middle school. She says, these kids come here from Mexico, from Venezuela, from countries in Africa. They show up in this country very respectful to their parents. They are shocked when they see 13-year-olds talking back to the teachers in school. But a few months later, they learn to do the same thing. And the parents come and say, what is going on in this school? My child never would have done this back home. Or they say something worse that sounds kind of violent. What would have happened to the child if they dare try to do something like this back at home? So unfortunately, the models sometimes young people get, they take the worst of their own country and the worst of this country instead of the best. So we need young evangelists, young people who know the two cultures and can guide their fellow young people, choose the best, the education, the possibilities, the work ethic that this country gives, and choose the best of the beautiful traditions of your family, especially their Catholic faith, or their faith, whatever it is. I think what we also need as a church, for Latinos, a lot of times the Spanish masses, I said it myself a moment ago, how do we pass on the cultural traditions? Our Lady of Guadalupe, the festivals, the beautiful traditions. This is what Catholicism means in Latin America, those beautiful traditions. It's a Catholicism of culture. But in this country, it's not enough. It's a beautiful thing. We should pass it on. We should preserve it. Those of us who aren't Latino can benefit greatly from it. But in this country, with all the secular forces and temptations, you can't make it with just a Catholicism of culture most of the time for a young person. You need a Catholicism of commitment. And that's what Pope Francis keeps telling us. You need a personal encounter with Jesus Christ, because your cultural background isn't going to carry it. You need to have had through a youth retreat, a cursillo, a youth movement, if you're going to a Catholic school, a place like Notre Dame, or in many other ways, that personal encounter. And that's, as a church, what we need to foster. The culture, the traditions of the people that are beautiful carriers of the faith, but the commitment that comes from a personal encounter with Christ. For that, more than anything else, we need young apostles. Old people like me can talk about it, priests can preach about it, singers like Tony can sing about it, but we need young people to go to the young people and say, this is the way. I've seen beautiful things in parishes where you get together, the parents sometimes are too strict on the kids. They're so afraid of what's going to happen in this permissive society that they get real strict, and then the kids rebel. And the kids sometimes just don't appreciate your parents laid down their life so you could be here. Your mother doesn't even know how to make a dress anymore. She did all of that so you could be here. So in several of the parishes I've been in, we have, kind of communication nights. I've seen Korean communities do this too, where you get young people like you who can talk on both sides to talk to the parents and the youth and to help them to mutually appreciate one another on both sides. That can be a very powerful evening of prayer and conversation in a parish or in a school or a Catholic center. Friends, you've been very patient with me, so I'll talk with anybody else that wants to in the back. There's some refreshment. Sisters, is there any announcement or anything else? Thank you very much. Thank you.